Okay, welcome everyone to whichever Cyber Cafe Sci event this is. I have completely lost count, what with the specials and crossing international time zones so many times. So I know it's more than 10, and we'll go with that. I think the last one was the 13th, but it might not have been. Some of you I know have been to one of these events before, others of you haven't, and some of you are watching on the various live streams. So to the people watching on the live streams, hello. I will try and keep an eye on your questions, but I can't guarantee anything. For everyone more local, Cyber Cafe Sci, as you know, tries to replicate the interactivity and the conversational nature of cafe Sci's in coffee shops, wine bars, and similar. So if you do have any questions, then drop them in the chat, raise your hand, or drop them in the Q&A, and I, as usual, will rudely interrupt our speaker to throw the questions at them. Which is the way we normally do things. Don't expect too much politeness, Dr. Metcalf. I'm sorry about that. And that's really about it. So just a quick bit about Cafe Sci. Cafe Scientifique is a international movement towards open science and public conversation about science. So it's talks about scientific topics where there's more of a dialogue than a straightforward one-way presentation. So we do actively encourage that. It's also a very informal atmosphere. Things have gone wrong before. We've had experiments fail live on air, which was interesting. And so far we've only had one dog and one dinner set on fire, but we have had several cats. So things happen, and that's part of the nature of it. But it is an open science movement. This is the online version. And I'd like to welcome you to speak with Dr. Lane Metcalf about Arbitrary Albatross, which I believe is about the naming of vulnerabilities in cybersecurity or security to make them more relatable to humans. Hopefully I'm close enough on that.
Yes, you are.
Okay. And with that, I will take myself off spotlight.
Okay, everyone, thank you for joining. Let me bring up my presentation. Oh, wow. Okay, let's see if this works. Share screen. Is it sharing?
Yep, and we've just moved on to PowerPoint.
Yes, good. There.
Perfect.
So before I start, I'll introduce myself. I'm Lee Metcalf. I am a researcher at CERT, located at Carnegie Mellon. I've got an interesting background. I have a PhD in theoretical mathematics. My field is called algebraic topology, which I describe as the math that string theorists use. Needless to say, there isn't a lot of application of it to cybersecurity, but I also spent 10 years in industry and I can program in more languages than I can remember. So I call myself a one-stop shopping network. I can do code, I can design experiments, and I can write them up. I am also the co-editor-in-chief of a new journal called ACM Digital Threats Research and Practice. The goal of that is to bridge the gap in cybersecurity between researchers and practitioners, which unfortunately too often happens. We also are open access. That was a main goal for us when we started the journal, is we don't think security should be behind a paywall. And we are working on finding sponsors, but at the moment, ACM has set us to be an open access journal. There is no cost to submit to us at all. So if you're interested in submitting and aren't sure how to do it, please contact me on Twitter or go to our website, dtrap.acm.org, and there's a link to how to email us there, and we'll be happy to help. So this presentation I'm giving is one of my favorites. You'll see why in the future, but I work with Art Mannion of the CERT CC, the CERT Coordination Center. And he noticed that people don't really remember the CVE numbers associated with vulnerabilities, but they do remember the words like Spectre, Meltdown, Smash, Dirty Cow. I mean, all the scary ones that make them worry. And he said, why are we waiting and letting people actually name them? We should be neutrally naming them as we go along. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. So this is the presentation that came out of that project. And we start with some legalese. Be sure to read this. There will be a quiz at the end. Great. Everyone's read it? Sure, moving on. Sorry about that. They insist I put it up there. So vulnerability identification, there is a functional requirement to identify the vulnerabilities as they come in. We want to know what the problems are with software, with hardware, with anything that can cause problems with the software and unfortunately steal our information. And there's a lot of known vulnerability scanning. It actually, I was doing some research recently that really started in the mid-90s is when the people were actually automatically scanning for vulnerabilities, but there's problems. At the time, there were so many different ways to scan a vulnerability. It's sort of like malware. If you talk to different malware researchers, each kind of malware has its own, my favorite name for it. Well, vulnerabilities had their own favorite names. I mean, the CERT CC uses what we call VU pounds. CUPS uses something else. FreeBSD uses something else. I think Red Hat had their own for a while. And for much more detail on that, there's a paper that's listed there. It's basically what really is the problem is before CVE came along, everyone named your own vulnerability, but you didn't actually know who had the same stuff going on since it was all different. There was no centralized naming. So now we have CVEs. The problem with CVEs is I'm okay with numbers. I'm perfectly fine to remember numbers. I have random IP addresses stuck in my head for some reason. But people aren't necessarily okay with remembering numbers. I was talking to someone about this recently, and I'm like, look, if you have someone who ended up with your CISO position out of nowhere, and you're suddenly talking to them about CVE 2020-005, they're going to be lost. But if you say, hey, that vulnerability that was called that vulnerability's name, then they're more likely to remember it. But sometimes, like I said, sometimes people need to talk about them. In fact, Art gave testimony in front of the US Senate on complex vulnerabilities from the Spectre and Meltdown problem. I unfortunately was in France when it happened, but I was told there was a viewing party for the whole thing. The other, I mean, this is going on with a problem of remembering things. People don't remember numbers. There's this work coming from what3words.com, which essentially shows that people are more likely to remember words than digits or letters. We have other things that get named. Hurricanes get named. I mean, there was Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy. We also have the Weather Channel in the United States, which also likes to name winter storms. That's their own naming. No one else knows anything about it outside the Weather Channel. We also have what3words, which is a map of words to a location on the earth. The model head spine is actually the exact location where this talk was originally given in Las Vegas. So numbers have features, right? They're unique. It's pretty easy to get a list of unique numbers. Words, well, we have sufficient combinations. It's pretty easy to get a list of unique words. Recognition, for a computer geek, sure. For a scientist, sure. For a regular person, not really. Words, though, on the other hand, okay. Most numbers don't really have a meaning associated with them either, out of context. Words, yep, context. Computing, on the other hand, computers love numbers but hate words. But on the other hand, some vulnerabilities are actually named, whether we like it or not, usually by the researchers, and they're also marketed. Okay, so they want people to know, hey, I found this really cool vulnerability, and here's the name associated with it, and the logo even. I mean, you're really going full bore if you market your vulnerability you found with a name and a cute logo. So the question became, when Art was first thinking about this, how many of these vulnerabilities do you actually name? Do you name some of them? Do you choose a subset? Do you name all of them? Well, Art said, if we're going to name some, we're going to name all the vulnerabilities. Every single last bloody one of them. I said, sure. And do we use severity? I hope you weren't expecting me to talk about CVSS if you know anything about vulnerabilities for severity.
I wasn't expecting you to talk about CVSS, but a quick explanation of it and possibly some of the issues around it for those people in the audience who aren't in our field might be useful.
Certainly.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to. So I'm a mathematician, and they had me read one of the CVSS things, and essentially it is a way to sort of say how severe this vulnerability is, and it's a scoring system. So anyway, I was reading the specification, and I got a half page into it, and I pretty much tossed it across the room and said, nope, you cannot make me work on this. There's not enough money. They basically designed it to have a normal distribution. Your results are basically going to fall in one of three numbers. And that's with a little wiggle room, but it's basically one of three numbers. So it's basically low, medium, high. And if you use the scoring, for example, Spectrum Meltdown, which could cause a serious, one of those vulnerabilities, serious problem, actually got a medium notation of this is a medium vulnerability. It's not that scary. I think we can agree otherwise. It was kind of scary to hear about the fact that your Intel boxes may be owned by anyone.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, so to use that is sort of like, no. So CERT actually is working on a replacement that uses decision trees called SVCC. I am not on that committee or project because when they said something about CVSS after having read it, I said, nope, nope, not enough money. Nope, nope. Continuing my discussion on how much I hate that. Luckily, my boss just laughed at me and said, sure, no problem. We won't make you.
Is the choice of SVCC deliberate?
I don't know. I would have to ask them. Like I said, I really avoided that project. There is a blog post on the CERT blog about it, and there's some white papers available there, cert.org. Hopefully we'll explain it better, but I really avoided that project. And they promised me it was nothing like CVSS. And I'm like, I really don't want to get into that because right now it's more of a political mess than anything else. Because there are some people who are just married to CVSS and they don't want to change.
Including many of the scanners.
Yes, yes, they don't want to change anything. But the thing is, it's not very useful. Like I said, there's only three numbers you get out of it. And the way it's rated, I mean, I did throw the paper across the room, literally, when I was halfway through one page. Because I was like, you are trying to force it into one of three categories, which doesn't really work on this. This is a spectrum.
On that, we've had our first question from the audience, which is possibly related to mathematics. So let's take it from that angle. Is there debate about the dimension of scoring, and if so, which dimensions are considered candidates?
That is not a question I can actually answer because I did not really work on that project. I will be happy to find you someone who will be happy to talk about SVCC and tell you about the problems with CVSS. And I'm sure I'll be happy to know I volunteered him.
Actually, yeah, if you could point him our way and tell him he's going to do a talk, that would be great.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're writing a book at the moment. So as soon as he's free from that, he'll be happy to hear it.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Certainly. But I was involved with this neutral naming project, partly because, well, I got to sit in my office and laugh a lot. So we wanted neutral names. You know, we didn't want to name something the naughty cow because whether or not that's associated with the score of how exploitable it is that usually makes people say, oh, wait, it's naughty. It's probably bad. I should be really worried about it, when it could be, you know, nothing or very limited danger. So the other question was from Art was, can we also name them to actually get the severity in place? And I said, well, if you want to add another word. He said, let me think about it. He hasn't actually answered that one yet to me. So what words do we want to choose? Well, we chose English because we're American and it's the de facto global technical language, but we could have chosen another language. I mean, I could have gone French, and instead of the red dog, called it chien rouge. I could have gone noun, noun. I said, no, I'm doing adjective noun. It's more fun. And there we have a nice red dog to go with our vulnerability. Even already has a nice logo.
I'm just trying to work out how you would deal with gendered nouns in other languages with vulnerabilities.
That would be a very difficult, I don't know if that'd be very difficult. Actually, English is problematic with NLP because it's so weird. But like German has a more structured availability, and it might be easier to do a German for gendered. But I stuck with English because actually I'm most comfortable in it. So the question was, how many names do we need? And this is the point where Art basically handed it over to me, because we wanted to take the catalog number, the CVID, and take it to a name. And he also had the problem of the words have meanings. All right. And connotation. Like I said, if I named it the naughty cow, people are going to take that connotation in the way. If it names rhyming, then that's easier to remember, but I'm not really going to make something that's going to rhyme all the words.
So just on part of that confusion or the issue with words having meanings, COVID-19 confuses some people, and I can vouch for this, because they think it's the 19th variant. Is that a potential problem with naming vulnerabilities?
I hope not. I will definitely show you how I actually went through and put all the logic and how I was thinking about this through. There's not just, and here's my solution. It's like, here how I worked through it. Okay. Because, you know, when COVID-19 was first out, it was called the coronavirus. And apparently a lot of people believe that related to the Corona beer.
I think their shares dropped by 38% and they haven't recovered yet.
Yeah, because people associated the name with it. So one of the first attempts at doing this actually named a vulnerability Scruffy Merkin. It was basically, I told Art, we really can't publish that. Okay, I'm sorry, no. Because anyone that knows what those are wouldn't work.
On things that you can't publish, there's a famous case with apparently the Vauxhall Nova, meaning no go in Portuguese, which is obviously not what you want to name your car. To what extent, I mean, did you consider cultural sensitivity or different interpretations as an issue when naming with words, or was that let's leave it for now?
We tried, but you can download, for example, the entire Urban Dictionary. And there are some combinations of word in there. I'm like, okay, this word is never going to be in the Urban Dictionary. It'd be there like 30 times. I'm going, seriously? And so it's like, if I take the word cauliflower, is it going to be a problem in a different language or mean something to someone else in a different state? So we actually ended up with a curated list of words that we hope are not problematic. But our plan is, if anyone says, hey, this is problematic, because I mean, I'm studying French, but I have no idea what is, problematic in French because I'm just studying it. So the plan is, if someone comes up and says, hey, you named this and this is problematic here, we will delete the name and rename it and make sure nothing else gets named like that. We're more reactive than proactive in this problem, because proactive, I'm not sure anyone could really do that one proactively well. There's always going to be a corner case you miss.
Yep. Thank you.
So the other question was, do we want to do family names, like when there's similarity with the spectra variants, or do we want to group them somehow? The problem is that requires prior knowledge for the similarity and somehow of taking the descriptions of the CVEs and turning that into a similar naming thing. I don't do NLP, I just read about it occasionally. And I told Art, if you wanted to do that one, you could do it later in the next version of this project, but I'm not doing that.
Just for anyone in the audience confused, while NLP does stand for neuro-linguistic programming, which is the therapy thing, it's also natural language processing, which I think is the one you're using in this case.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm using, yeah, I didn't even know about the first one.
Yeah. Ask a social engineer. They'll go on about it for days.
Actually, speaking of social engineers, I have a project right now for the journal. We want to do a special issue on the digital threats of data. This is very much related to things going on in the world and how the data can be basically set up to sort of train your ML wrong so that it is basically racially insensitive or culturally insensitive. And if you know any social engineers that are interested, please have them contact me. We're trying to find one because we want to do this right.
Let's have a chat after this.
Sure. So this is where I actually come in this whole project. My Art was like, so how do we solve this? I don't know. I'm not a mathematician. I just do vulnerabilities. And then he said, oh yeah, Lee wrote a book. I wrote this book because I would be sitting in my office working and someone come in and ask me to explain a mathematical concept to them in terms of cybersecurity. And after enough people did that, I said, hey, my coworkers can't be the only ones with these problems. We'll just write a book explaining math and cybersecurity terms so that you can understand the concepts and what they mean, not necessarily how to do it. This is not a book with proofs. This is a book on what everything means in math. So I started by making word lists because I had to have word lists before I could do my algorithm. So my first one was to scrape the Wiktionary. That was fun. I got an awful lot of words out of this. I got over 500,000 adjectives and over 1 million nouns. And I can name all the vulnerabilities. And if we have more than that vulnerabilities, then yeah, we're in real big trouble. There was just a problem with this because it was all the words. I'm not even going to try. And pietous steeplechaser was a possible combination. I said, yeah, no one's going to do that. No one's going to be able to remember those words. That's part of what we want, is to remember the words. So the next word list I went to was I found something that was tagged for parts of speech. And I created 2 lists of all singular adjectives and nouns from this. And so now I could name over 227 million, a lot fewer than Wiktionary, but I ran across some interesting combinations again. My first test came up with the phrase gelatinous whitehead as a possible vulnerability name. I'm not naming a vulnerability that either. One thing we talked about was taking out all terms found in the Urban Dictionary. And I said, I'm gonna just keep looking. I found a list of common adjectives and nouns just by searching Google. Google knows all. We'll ask Google. That gave me a reasonable number. I can name 6 million. That's not bad. I don't think we have that many vulnerabilities yet at all, so that should give us some breathing room. On the plus side, nothing too offensive. I could name it apologetic alligator, corrupt bird bath, and tickled allegro. So that's not too bad, but I was kind of on a roll, so I kept going because I was having fun with this. Like I said, this is one of my favorite projects because I got to sit in my office and laugh. I found a paper that studied the emotional context of words and had a numerical rating to each. And they had a word list associated with it. And I used some science, well, not really. I just picked a scientific method of anything above this value is a happy word. It was very scientific, totally, I promise. And yummy nudity is in that list. And if I ever name a vulnerability yummy nudity and it gets talked about anywhere, I think I'll change careers because I won't be able to top that in this one. So then I went to, now that I had word list, I needed a solution to the problem. I needed to know, how do I get to my word list to my CVEs, or excuse me, CVEs to word list. So I needed a surjective and injective list. That means I needed unique on both ways. When I mapped it to the words, it needed to go to a unique pair of words. And if I took the pair of words and went back to the CVE, it also had to be unique. And it's got to be repeatable. Art's first suggestion was use randomness. And I said, no, it has to be repeatable. I mean, if we lose everything with a hard drive crash or something, we have to be able to recreate the entire thing and not suddenly rename everything. So randomness is right out, no randomness. And I didn't want to tie it to a specific set of words, which is kind of a given, because if, for example, someone in France wanted to do this on their own with French, or Germany with German, or anywhere with their own set of languages, we wanted to be able to give them a method that would actually work with their languages. So my first method was, well, okay, modulus. Modulus will work. Modulus has collisions all over the place. So there went uniqueness right out. No uniqueness. Darn. So much for the easy solution. The next solution was based on number theory. I am not a number theorist, but I worked with one, and we talked about this problem. I wanted to find unique integers such that AN plus BM equals X, where X would be the CVE ID. It is a solution, but it's not unique unless N and M are relatively prime. And if we fiddled with our word list, it's possible to create this, but my coworker, who is a number theorist, informed me we'd get at least one paper out of the method. And I said, okay, moving on. Method 2 is out. Method 3. I went back and I looked at my constraints. I wanted a function that went from the integers to the pair of integers, and the functions should have an inverse. So I did what mathematicians do and stared at the walls for a bit. And I know you see in the movies, mathematicians are writing on whiteboards and doing all kinds of figures. We also stare at the walls a lot. Sometimes we stare at paper and scribble something on the paper, ball it up, throw it across the room, and go back to staring at things. And then it hit me. The solution actually hit me. One solution, the Hilbert curve. The Hilbert curve, you may have seen this XKCD, where they took the Hilbert curve to map IPv4 space in 2006. It is a it's not a self-organized map, it's a fractal that wraps around itself. And it had exactly what I needed. It takes a integer to the XY coordinate on the curve, or vice versa. I could go from the XY coordinate on the plane and determine the length of the curve, which is an integer. I'm awesome, I'm done, yay, except there's problems. There's always problems. Why aren't there always problems? This only works for curves up to length m squared minus 1, then we get repetitions. And it also requires for this to work that n equal m. So I cheated when I first go around and use the modulus for adjectives, excuse me. So I have words, I have a method I think is going to work. And now what's the input? Well, there's a problem with this, of course. I thought when I first started this, CVE IDs were assigned in more or less numerical order, that if I had 9999, then the next one would be 10,000. That doesn't work like that. CVEs are assigned in groups to what are called CNAs, which are certificate numbers, not certificate, the numbering authority for it. The CNA may get something, or between 16,000 and 17,000, or they can get between 1 million and 1,005,000. There's no rhyme or reason to how they assign these numbers, and it's huge. So I'm like, okay, now what's the problem? If I remove a dash and consider the year and the number, because I need the year, I can't just do the number, the year is important, then the CVEs tend to be larger than the number of adjectives times the number of nouns. unless I'm using the Wiktionary word list, which I think we already discussed. That one's a little too weird to use. And so my first solution was to do some modulus maybe. Well, that didn't work. Take CVE minus the minimum CVE and try that. That didn't work. And so then my next one was to say, I shall use some math. Math will solve all. The Cantor pairing and unpairing functions. For the Cantor pairing and function, that means, pairing function, that means you could take two integers and get a unique third integer by putting them together. So any other two integers you put together using this function will not give you the third integer. And you can actually depair the same way. You can take an integer like 10,000 and it will become decomposed into two integers, which are unique for 10,000. No other number will give you those two integers. My first run on this gave some names with 2 words and some name with 3 to 4 words. And I said, that's not really useful. I mean, I don't want to name it cat, dog, fish when it's easy to remember just cat, dog, or in my case, adjective noun, which was, fluffy cat. So I was still working on a solution this first go around, but I wanted to show you what happens when I use this method to name some things. So we have Spectre. Our friendly Spectre meltdown, the one that got Art testifying before Congress, is CVE 2017-5715, and it's speculative execution. And it actually has grown into quite the family of vulnerabilities. I was at a conference last year where they talked about basically a method that would, if you use this, you could possibly generate all the vulnerabilities. So I went through and named it with my method, my current method using the Hilbert curve. So with the common words, I get deputy consideration. The happy words, genetic paradise. I don't think we can call Spectre genetic paradise.
We've just had a few questions in. So
Sure.
Firstly, how do these mathematical mappings avoid the problem of weird word combinations? And there was far too much alliteration in there.
Well, at the moment, like I said, this one actually didn't turn out to be the one we used. Sorry about that if you heard my cats. They're having a disagreement. At the moment, the problem with the Hilbert curve, which I was going to cover later, was that everything close together ends up with similar names. So these methods, it's really about the word list that you input to it, not necessarily the combinations. Does that more or less answer the question?
I think so. So with the Hilbert curve, you'd get essentially, if they were temporarily close, you would get very similar names.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And we don't really want that so much.
Yeah. No.
No, because the first go around, you would get, and I'm making these words up because I can't remember them all, but you might get cloned cow next to catty cow.
I can guarantee on the blue team side, if we had, say, genetic paradise and genetic cow, people would assume that they're related vulnerabilities.
Right. That was definitely a problem. And there's also, I do have a solution. We actually have a Twitter bot up and running at the moment. But Art had so much fun with me putting these together. I left them in the talk because I get to say things like abundant genetic paradise and get paid for it.
And we've got one from Anne-Marie Barker. Did you look at, or have you looked at the method that What 3 Words used to assign their system to locations?
No, because at one point Art told me that wasn't open source. Is it open source?
I honestly don't know. I would assume probably not, because it's essentially their entire business.
Yeah, is it doing the 3 words? I did look at assigning 3 words at one point, and it sounded too close to that kind of thing. And people tend to remember adjective noun easier, I think, than, head. I don't know, what was it, model, head, spine?
Yeah, it's always short words and.
Yeah. I think the current solution we have works very well for now. And like I said, we're being very reactive on the combinations. So if anyone has a problem with them, You can tweet to the account, or you can tweet to me, and I will be happy to take care of it. I was very careful, or tried to be very careful with the word lists we ended up using them, because they are very much hand cultivated.
Okay, so just on what 3 words, it's free to use via their app or map if you're not commercial, but is very much black box closed source.
Yeah.
Another one.
We're actually releasing the code for this soon.
There's another one on Spectre, which I think is going a bit into the specifics of it. So I assumed that Spectre was meaningful, as in speculative prediction or speculative execution.
Speculative execution, that's where they came up with it. Yeah. Meltdown was, I think, because what was supposedly do in some cases is meltdown the system.
Yeah.
And then so it had 2 names, and it got very confusing for me very quickly.
Rowhammer actually made a sort of sense, and Dirty Cow they chose because they wanted to make fun of naming and branding of vulnerabilities, which backfired.
Because everyone remembers. And then there's Heartbleed, which of course it was the heartbeat in OpenSSL, which caused the vulnerability. So Heartbleed sounded appropriate. These got named. I mean, happy words, economic freedom. I guess economic freedom for the adversaries and not for us.
And the other one is, have you worked with crossword clue designers?
No, I have not worked with crossword clue designers. No.
I don't know if that's a leading question into you should, because, but we'll wait for it to come in if it is, and until then, if you carry on.
And then here's Dirty Cow, which we named instead. Well, I don't think heady convenience. So happy words were pretty much out. Happy words were not a good choice. Our first run at this was using the common words, and Flax Bugle doesn't sound too bad. I really wanted to stay with Hilbert Curve because it's cute, cool, but like I said, it wrapped things together in phrasing, and that was problematic. So instead, I went to Cantor's pairing depairing function that I talked about before. My second problem was the CVEs that I mentioned before. There really isn't a limit on how high these identifiers can be. I said there's a limit, right? So for whatever reason, I'm on the vulnerability team at CERT, but I'm not a vulnerability researcher. I describe my research as more of challenging assumptions that are made in cybersecurity. I don't, and this project, because like I said, it made me laugh. I mean, I get to say yummy nudity and get paid for it. I can't, yeah, that made me laugh. So I always go to them and make sure I'm assuming right. And they're like, no, there's no limit. There's absolutely no limit on how high that identifier can be. And I said, that's a problem. So I came up with a solution. I created my own ordering of CVEs. I have a SQLite database that every time a new CVE is added in time, I add it to my SQLite database and give it a new ID that's similar to CVEs, but it is year, then the order of that I have as it comes into the database. And that is what I mapped to a phrase. And we made a Twitter account, Vulnonym, where these are made as CVEs show up in the MVD data. It automatically bots them out. I sit and watch it and laugh at sometimes because it comes up with some interesting combinations. The word lists, the adjectives I used were from the common words in a Google search. There's about 1,000 of those. For the words themselves, I said, okay, what's relatively, hopefully inoffensive? And I started with lists of animals, plants, geographic features. And I just sat down one morning and Googled and Googled and Googled and came up with these lists. And then Art looked over them by hand. It's about 1,000 words. And he said, I don't see anything anyone could have a problem with. However, If for somehow, dirty cow happened again and we've collided, well, then we will remove it. Or if someone tweets to Bolonym, like I said, or lets us know this is offensive in my language, we will be happy to remove it immediately. There's no real appeal process that we sit down and think about whether or not it's appropriate to remove. If someone says, what was one of them recently? I think it was dirty otter or something like that. Dirty otter is actually meaning something very offensive in my language, then it goes into discussion. I don't sit and argue with you. I don't say, are you sure? I'm like, okay, I'll remove it. And I will tweet out a replacement. Well, the bot will. So that's the entire presentation on how to name vulnerabilities. I hope you found it interesting. And are there any more questions?
I'm sure there will be. I've got a few. I mean, the idea of reactively just removing names because you've got a huge pool to draw on and can afford to seems much more straightforward than trying to predict what's going to enter popular slang tomorrow. One question that's come in: scientists name experiments through clever, funny acronyms. Should they consider taking more care so that the name is not only memorable but meaningful and appropriate?
For scientists?
Mm-hmm.
I would think so. We've actually talked about using this for malware. Like I said before, malware families get named sort of randomly. And it's like, you want a neutral name, not the scary name.
Yeah. Is there, I mean, I have my view on this. From what you've looked into and what you've seen, is there a problem with names being selected for vulnerabilities, for malware families, for APTs, various others, to cause alarm and look good on marketing materials or news stories?
Well, my favorite example of this is one that was called Smash. And it was from, late 90s, I believe. And it was a very scary vulnerability with the name and big marketing push. And oh my God, your bash shell is vulnerable. It turns out the only way to use that vulnerability is if you already had root.
Yeah.
So they marketed it as this really scary thing that could happen. But when you actually looked into it, it really wasn't scary at all. And I could actually imagine a scenario where you convince the person, oh yes, you need to upgrade your bash to get around this. And it's, by the way, it's my cracked bash and you're dead meat anyway.
I've been in that exact scenario, and I remember that vulnerability, and I remember it causing a massive headache with trying to explain it's really not an issue and your systems aren't going to survive if you upgrade them.
I was security at the time for the startup I was at. And I had people running into my office. Oh my God, you have to upgrade bash. Now upgrading bash on the 300 or 400 systems we had at the time meant a couple of sleepless nights for me. And I like my sleep. I love my sleep. So I said, I looked into it closely and said, nope, bash doesn't get upgraded until we have a real reason for it, because this is nothing.
I'm trying to remember what the CVE score came out at. I think it was either medium or high.
Yeah, it was scary, a worry. Oh my God.
CVSS. A recent protest in the US showed a banner of 2-word mortal sins, some of which the questioner had no idea what they were. Is there a risk of choosing words that are offensive because so many words eventually are? Fudge packer was one, which in the UK is slightly naughty, but I'm guessing in the US is quite a bit worse.
Yes, it is a bit worse. Well, that I can tell you that that's not in the list. Like I said, it's a curated list, but on the other hand, humans are endlessly inventive, and otter may become part of a swear word tomorrow, and I may accidentally choose it. I am never going to try to guess what humans do. I did that working in startups, and I got lots of headaches.
Okay, I know who this one's come from. Is your 2-word code list a message space with the vulnerability being an index or a vector into it?
A message space? I'm not sure I understand the question.
So can we just get a bit of clarity on message space from whoever anonymous was? It'll take them a minute to type. There we go.
Sure.
As in Shannon theory, mapping code into a message space.
I'm not familiar with Shannon theory, so I would have to go and research it. The only thing I've done with Shannon is his entropy.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh, there's the mention that you might want to look at it. It could be useful.
Okay. This is oops. This project, like I said, we are running. We do have a Vulnernym Twitter bot, and we are releasing the code soon. Our code release has to go through a couple of steps that involve legal, which is oh so fun, unfortunately. And once that happens, then we'll be happy to I'll be happy to share the Twitter, the GitHub to anyone who wants it.
Yeah. We're just looking at, or I'm just looking at the Twitter at the moment. So apparently the latest for our simplistic ratchet, which I really like, Peachy Rima, which feels like it's going to end up on Urban Dictionary.
Yes, some of that really feels like it does.
And
yeah, the Urban Dictionary though is huge. You can download, by the way, if you're ever curious, you can download the entire dictionary.
And unwashed squawfish, which is either a cocktail or also going to end up on Urban Dictionary.
I think that's true of a lot of phrases that basically sound randomly put together. I mean, one possible choice at one point was use that corpus I found and just pull out all its combination of adjective nouns and use those. And I'm like, first of all, I don't think that's nearly enough. And second of all, it's a little too predictive.
I see what you mean about the laughing now. Doable bluefish is on there. Yep. I'm going to adopt these. I'm going to start using them. You stop being anonymous by unticking the anonymous box when you're writing the question. It's just under the text box, but it's continuing on from the mention of Shannon and message spaces. I realized to anyone watching, me waving in different directions makes no sense, but there are monitors here and here as well as here. So I'm pointing at whichever one I'm talking about. But on the Shannon question, it's about communication in the presence of noise, looking at geometric representation of signals, and is apparently in the same paper in which he introduces sampling theory.
Oh, okay. That sounds interesting. We wanted to, I really took this project on because it made me laugh. I mean, I'm all for a good project that it's a good laugh. I actually did a presentation called grep for evil. And the summary of that was, look how easy it is to find malicious stuff. But at the end, I've only found this much when there's this much out there. So it's a good presentation to give people who say, oh, this is really easy. I'm like, yeah, sure, it's easy. But my block lists have 44 million names on them. And you found 100.
Did you ever come across RFC 3514?
You have to remind me what RFC 3514 is.
It's the evil bit.
Ah, yes. Actually, that was in the presentation called grep for evil. I started with the evil bit.
Thought it might be.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one. Could you apply, or can you apply reverse principles to instead find meaningful names rather than deliberately arbitrary ones?
I would, we discussed that. First of all, I don't really do natural language. We do have a couple of people at CERT who do natural language. And I said, if you want meaningful names, they're the people. I am pretty good at knowing where my limitations are, and that was definitely a limitation. I'm a Delante and NLP. I just think it's fun because the English language is so weird. But if you really want someone to do it meaningful, or the other question was, can we name things like everything in the same specter category, everything with that kind of vulnerability gets similar names? And that's again with the NLP people of getting similar meaning out of the descriptions.
I've got to say, I can see some of the same problems with naming vulnerabilities as you get with, frankly, naming species. And that's been worked on for hundreds of years and still isn't quite right, or even close to right.
I mean, this is just our solution. If someone comes along and says, hey, here's a better way of doing it, I think Art would be more than happy to hear about it. He is the vulnerability person. I am just the mathematician who said, hey, I can laugh at this project. I'll have fun. And I get to use some math. So, hey, I'm all for it.
I think we've got almost a suggestion here to do a rate my vulnerability name feed. So could you publish a potential name list so people can point out the funny and offensive ones in advance, which I guess is what you're doing through the Twitter account?
Yes, I mean, we could do it. I could, because of the way things are fed into it, do sort of a, here's the next 100 names are going to be coming up. Because the way I order everything, and then I can just basically say, okay, the next 100 names will be in this order. What will their names be? We could conceivably do that. I could talk to Art about it.
I'm just remembering a while ago, a long while ago, before he died, Douglas Adams wrote a book called The Meaning of Liff, which was a load of definitions that he just assigned to English place names that hadn't been used for anything, and there were some lovely ones in there. I'm just wondering is if you were to publish that list of names beforehand, if someone were to be somewhere between mischievous and malicious, I could see someone taking it, uploading it to Urban Dictionary and sticking some random definitions next to it.
Yes. Yes, I can see them. Well, yes. There are trolls on the internet who would happily do that. But I may actually talk to Art about doing it internally and having an intern basically review the list every once in a while to say, hey, Lee, this one might be offensive.
There's also the suggestion of voting on good ones. So America's got vulnerabilities.
America's got vulnerabilities. There we are, voting on the good ones. Yes. I was, for a while, every time I found one that made me laugh, I was sharing with my coworkers, hey, I just named a vulnerability this, and they'd start laughing at me. There were some we did release this the first go around, and there were some very interesting names on there that probably were in the Urban Dictionary. That was removed. All those tweets were deleted, and the new one, I hope, is much less potential to be immediately offensive. How's that?
Shaded swallow, underpaid monoceros, and I was disappointed at this because I originally read it as rampage, but it's ramage Pekingese, and rampage Pekingese would be much better.
Yes.
I'm just going to spend hours just watching the Twitter feed now. That's my weekend sorted.
I'm glad I could help.
Right. There's not been any questions coming in, or any more questions coming in. So thank you so much for this. We'll go offline in a bit.
Can I do one more thing about DTRAP?
Of course.
Because I'm always publicizing the journal. We do have some special issues coming forward. One thing we realize that not everyone's open to writing an academic paper. Not everyone has the time or the inclination. So we do have 3 things for non-academics. One's called a field note, which is more of an experiential paper of, I saw this, I did this works for us, this doesn't work. We also have a column called With the Benefit of Hindsight, which is sort of an investigation of what did we learn from an old event? Like, what did we learn from Smash? We learned from Smash, don't name a vulnerability scary and watch everyone run scary, when it really isn't. And the other one is from research to practice. How do things move from research to practice? And has it been helpful or not helpful? Or what can we learn from this? As we really do want to hear from practitioners in this journal. And like I said, we are open access, so anyone could submit and it won't cost you a thing.
Brilliant. Right, I'm going to take us off the live stream now, but before I do that, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. We will continue to have a chat when we're no longer public to the whole internet.
Okay.
So everyone watching would say at home rather than from our luxury studio, good night. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you do have any questions, then just check on Twitter. We've tweeted everyone's handles and all of the details as it's been going on, and Chris has been live tweeting throughout the talk. So good night.